it's a mathematical reality that the highest performing GPs in this part of the market often also have the highest kill rates.
Superclusters is where we demystify the secrets, stories, and tactics behind the money that moves the venture capital world.
Sometimes you wonder, why don't you record all your conversations with a friend? That there are actually so many lessons to be shared encapsulated in every single interaction. Caroline is one of my favorite sparring partners for just that. Caroline Toch Docal is the head of the seed fund program and BCV Labs at, you guessed it, Bain Capital Ventures. She's a lifelong early stage enthusiast, from her time at Venture for America to Techstars to Chief to Dorm Room Fund and to now Bain Capital Ventures, where she runs the emerging manager program there, which has seen quite the evolution since 2017. Yes, we do talk about it later. From when do you do founder references in the diligence process to what does running a GP-friendly diligence process mean to how do you tell if a fund manager is really in it for the long term outside of them just saying it, I'm in it for the long run. This is the episode on how to read between the lines with none other than my friend, Caroline Toch Docal. Caroline, I know we just saw each other, and somehow it feels like I need to see more of you already. I'm so glad we lined this up despite seeing each other 2 days ago. And what an event you hosted 2 days back.
Very kind.
Are we allowed to share the timestamp of what happened 2 days back?
Yeah, absolutely. So we hosted our first ever BCV Emerge. So we brought together a number of incredible GPs for a day of honestly just spending time together and a lot of learning. And then in the evening, welcomed allocators who I enjoy very much, yourself included, for a reception at Catonia, which is a favorite Italian restaurant just up the street from our office here in Jackson Square, to meet each other. And my hope was that all of the GPs and LPs met someone who might be sort of a long-term partner in the future. So it was a great day. It was a labor of love. Obviously, anytime you have a big event, I think hosting is something to be very intentional about. And so a lot of thought went into it, but it was a total joy and I appreciate you being there.
Well, thank you for having me. I felt like I was a part of a very selective group of folks, and I was just like, oh, Caroline thought of me.
Of course.
What does one need to understand about Caroline's childhood to fully appreciate the person that's sitting in front of us today?
I will say two things. One is professionally, I grew up in DC. DC is an industry town. I think there's a lot of parallels to San Francisco. It always comes back to the people. There are in crowds and out crowds, and perhaps most importantly, your reputation, I believe, is sort of the strongest currency, both in that city and here. Growing up in DC taught me to think about sort of how I was spending my time, what the results of that output might be. The second is more personal, and I am smiling because if anyone who knows me already might be listening, I'm sure they're rolling their eyes at the moment because I really can't talk about myself without sharing that I went to summer camp. I think it is responsible for probably like 80% of my personality traits.
Wow. So 80-20 Pareto principle.
80-20. When I was 8 years old, for the first time, went to a camp that was on an island, a small island in Ontario, Canada. I will say that there was no electricity, there was no hot water for my early years there. And it turns out you don't really need that much, or at least I don't need that much to have the time of my life. I was there until I was 21, if you can believe it.
Holy cow.
Running that camp with my best friend. I sort of went out into the unknown at a very young age and left with relationships that were foundational to who I am 25 years later.
That is amazing. And so you've stayed there from 8 to 21. And if I'm doing my math right, that is 13 years while you were there. Why did you leave the summer camp at 21?
Despite my inclination to be Peter Pan, unfortunately, you do have to grow up. I was there the summer before my senior year of college and then, ultimately needed to get a job.
How does one live outside of Burning Man when you don't have electricity and water?
Flashlights. we had propane lighting. So you had these kind of like mesh, God, I remember forgetting the word for them. This sort of like diffuser that you would turn on the propane and then light that. That's only when you're a counselor though. When you're a kid, you just had flashlights.
You don't play with fire.
No. Flashlights, batteries, and campfires. And then my first summer there, we showered in the quote unquote showered in the lake. So we like all had to have biodegradable shampoo and you would just kind of like wash your hair in the lake. Cold water is just cold water. And then eventually there was hot water by the time I left. So you get creative.
Why would you say that summer camp, those 13 years of summer camp experiences is formative to the person you are today? Just to round that chapter.
Again, I really sort of showed up somewhere not knowing anyone or anything and it ended up being so incredible. And so I think what that teaches you then is like trying new things, and the unknown has the opportunity to unlock a lot of good rather than the other way of thinking about it, which is like unknown equals scary. It can also be scary, but you can get so much out of these things. I mean, if you look at my resume, my first job out of college was at a nonprofit called Venture for America that placed recent grads at startups and was sort of a cohort-based program. And that in many ways has summer camp vibes. It kicked off with a 6-week training camp. We literally called it training camp in Providence, Rhode Island at Brown, which is where the founder, Andrew Yang, attended school. And so that kind of has camp vibes. Dorm Room Fund is a fund that invests through a network of student investors. A lot of my job was like, spending time with those people. In some ways, that has camp vibes. There's a lot of different, I think, through lines in my career. Those are organizations that have sort of a clear set of values. And I think they attract people who have an interest in those values and already feel affinity toward them. And so you end up with a group of people who are values aligned and kind of interested in the same things. And the other thing is just they're organizations that kind of like span the test of time. We always joke at Dorm Room Fund, it's kind of like Hotel California. Like you can check in, but you can never leave. In that, you might join that organization as a freshman and still be involved as an alumni now 10, 11 years later. And going through just that much time with people and seeing people grow over time is a total treat. And I think also brings you closer.
I think so. So how does one go from being at venture funds and being involved in direct investing to being an allocator? That seems like, I feel like there's a couple leaps of faith there.
So at Dorm Room Fund, we wrote pre-seed checks. We're typically the first institutional cash in the door. As more of like a friends and family round, that's changed a little bit. They have a new model. But what that means is you're kind of catalytic capital and you get to see a lot of who founders are attracted to downstream. You get to see the behavior of those investors. You get to make assessments about, who you think is doing things well, who you think is maybe not the best partner for founders. So that I found to be like a really interesting vantage point as I was thinking about becoming an LP, especially in the part of the market that I'm in now, right? So I focus on emerging managers. The majority of the new relationships I take on are fund ones or fund twos. And to that end, Dorm Room Fund was a part of First Round Capital. And then when I arrived, myself and the GP, Molly Fowler, who's absolutely fantastic, and she really gets all the credit there, spun it out into an independent fund. So we were also a part of the same cohort of emerging managers. So I knew a lot of those people and had a lot of relationships from that sort of vantage point as well. And more importantly, evaluating emerging managers, in my view, is a lot like making early stage investments, which is that you're evaluating the founders of those organizations. So do they have the right characteristics that will lead to incredible outcomes? Do they have sort of the drive and, all these other things that go into what makes them who they are, that you believe is going to have a great sort of fund returning outcome. So there's actually, I think, a lot of through lines. That's my belief.
What would you say is the Venn diagram of early stage investing investing in emerging managers? Because you're right, there's a lot of overlap and a lot of people correlate that with the middle section of this, but how would you compare and contrast that?
Very much on the LP side. And again, this sort of middle, the overlap is that evaluating people. Perhaps on the LP side, you need to think through what your goals are. And, that for some people can be putting money to work. For some people, it can be getting access to co-investment opportunities. For some people, it can be, just pure play returns. I want the highest multiple on this money and I don't care about the long liquidity timeline. So thinking about that. And then as a result, thinking through what part of venture makes sense for you. Venture has many different pieces, and we're going to call them all the same thing. They have different attributes. If you're looking at growth in the sense of like pre-IPO, that is going to be lower multiple. I mean, your audience knows this, but lower multiples, shorter timelines to DPI. On the other side, if you're investing where I invest, you have the opportunity to capture really high upside. The best underlying fund in our fund of funds right now is sitting at a 36x. But that, it's not over until the distributions are there. So I will caveat. But, even unrealized, that's remarkable. But that's going to be a long timeline. So that's relevant. So going back to your question, that's kind of I would say the LP side of things. What is the portfolio construction? What does that mean? What else is going on in your portfolio? On the GP side, what's really different is depending on your strategy, if you're a specialist, if you are a generalist, that can totally change the expression of who you are as an investor and how you operate. That's not, I guess there's some parallels to the LP side, but it's a little different. I think the dynamics right now are such that capital is a little bit more commoditized on the GP side. Certainly in LP land, there are haves and have-nots. And I think thinking of, Mark Andreessen uses the sushi boat terminology. Thinking that as an LP, you should just wait and have something come to you and then take the best things off of it is a really bad strategy. I do think a lot of people operate that way. But if you do that in early stage venture as a GP, you're totally toast, right? You got to sell. And you got to have a right to win. So those are some distinctions, but ultimately there's in some ways two sides of the same coin, and in some ways really different.
There are obviously a lot of through lines there. What was going through your mind as you were making this transition? And was it a conscious decision that you had set yourself up to become an LP at some point? Or was it happen you had a lot of friends in the ecosystem and somebody had suggested that idea to you?
I'll be transparent. I was squinting at my life and I was kind of okay, at Dorm Room Fund, my edge in venture is sort of proximity to these really young, we'll say a lot of 19-year-olds. Despite my best efforts, each day I am getting older. And so that is a diminishing edge. As LPs, we think about, okay, we don't like diminishing edges. So I had to be a little self-aware and I was okay, what am I going to do next? Had a ton of conversations with people I really admire. And sort of one thing that bubbled up there was maybe a kind of a gap in the market for an LP who was super venture native, especially when it comes to emerging managers, where there's just so many folks. And so having been in that world already in sort of a different context is really useful. And I think how I ended up here is a long story and maybe we'll bore folks, but it was a sort of a series of happy accidents. And I think what was top of mind for me was, there are a lot of parallels here to other parts of my work, but I've never actually invested in funds before. I did not have a personal LP practice. And so, just wanting to make sure that I kept the bar really high right off the bat. I think people can probably relate to the fact that you feel like that first couple have a big weight to them because they're sort of an expression of your taste.
When you were making your first investment, could you walk us through what was going through your mind? Because you mentioned that your first few investments really indicate the kind of taste that Caroline has. At the same time, I don't know if this is true for you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. When I was making my first investment, I tended to over-intellectualize the frameworks that were necessary to make that investment instead of going with, let's say, a gut decision. Was that true for you, or did you have a different experience?
I think I probably did more diligence than has leveled out at our baseline. We run a very thorough, but also very GP-friendly diligence process. And we will participate in the first close of a fund one, which a lot of people say they will do and either don't or can't do for a number of reasons. And in order to achieve both of those things, when I was doing my first investment, I just did a ton of back channeling. And I think that's great. Like, it's super useful. But, sometimes in any process where you're taking references, there are sort of diminishing returns. And so I think that's a good learning. I think one of the things that's really tough about this part of the asset class is that everything looks pretty good until you see a lot of stuff. So there's also always a balance between, benchmarking in the market and baselining yourself, and then also just kind of taking the leap. So that's always a tension, I think, anytime you're in a new investing job.
You mentioned something that I find to be really interesting because, to your credit, there are a lot of amazing individuals, LPs, who say they run a really GP-friendly diligence process. At the same time, there's if I could borrow your verbiage, an extensive diligence process. And I almost find that to be like two ends of the spectrum, right? If you want to run something that's super GP-friendly, and you can define either of these that spectrum for me. But there's one end, there's GP friendly. The other end is extensive. And you can run an extensive process, and that could mean you talk to like 100 people in their network, which, as far as I know, I don't think any LP does. Or you can go do 3 to 5 references, and that's extremely friendly. And you do a bunch of off-list references, and eventually do like 2 to 3 on-list references just to confirm your suspicions. To you, when BCV does the GP-friendly diligence, what does that actually mean in practicality?
Yeah, I'll talk about our process with the caveat that sometimes when we meet folks, we have had really different experiences from the get-go. So to give you an example, we're really proud to have invested in Sarah Smith. I can't take credit for that. That decision predated me, but she was a partner here at BCV for a number of years prior to that sort of relationship morphing into a GP-LP relationship. And so that's just ultimately going to be a different decision-making process than someone who I may be outbound to and meet for the first time. And I think everyone, that's, probably pretty instinctive for folks, but I think it's worth sharing. Folks come into us a number of different ways. I spend a lot of time doing research and also spend a lot of time trying to tease out from the GPs who I admire a lot who they like to work with. Another is sometimes folks reach out inbound. We've been doing this for 8 years. And so I like to think, we've built our name for ourselves in market as a GP-friendly LP who will do early. And so that's sort of differentiated in itself. And there's a number of other kind of routes, but I spend time talking to those GPs, reviewing their materials, all the stuff that's really standard. And one of the kind of tools that I have in my toolkit, which is sort of part of the genesis of the fund of funds here at BCV, is I also get to work with a team of really incredible direct investors who often look at the same deals or know these people. And so, there's kind of a collective brain trust there as well. That's definitely a part of the conversation. You mentioned references. I think my goal is to use our broader network to really tease out. You always have to take people at their word and then kind of confirm or deny those assumptions. And we will do on-sheet references. Again, that's very much a way to kind of just like confirm your suspicions, to use your language. I think that at this point, if a GP is giving a reference that is on sheet that ends up being bad, that's obviously a huge red flag. Another thing I'll share is I use personally founder references as a step a little later in the process. I'll go through and I do my homework, so to speak, myself and work with my team and kind of talk to folks before getting there, because I believe that, or I know rather, that those founders, that time is so precious. And it is incredibly indicative. It's almost like the most important piece of the pie to understand how founders perceive a GP. But you also have to be mindful of the fact that, that founder might be getting 12 requests for references from LPs. And in the case of, one of the GPs that I backed, if that founder happens to be the CEO of Mercor, as much as I would love to talk to the founding team of Mercor, I already knew I was going to make that investment. And so at that point, it's selfish. And I do think that sometimes people use the referencing phase as a way to just talk to people or get to know people they want to meet. And I don't know that I believe that that is necessarily the most GP-friendly thing to do. And we, of course, do sort of like your standard legal and compliance and all that stuff is a part of the process as well. Got to keep my compliance team happy by saying that. Shout out.
You mentioned that you talk to founders at the very end of a diligence process. Just because...
Yeah, I wouldn't say at the very end. I would just say like there's other things I do first to make sure I've sort of like qualified the lead, so to speak.
Perfect. You are leading the witness here. And so the question ends up becoming, what are the things people that you talk to that help you qualify the lead in this sense? Obviously you're talking with internal team members. What are the other things you're doing?
I think of this process kind of like a game of chutes and ladders / Monopoly for the purposes of my analogy. So there are certain things that are just not going to pass go. They might be outside of scope for me based on size. I only do early stage venture. It could be like a Fund 7. There's just all these things that like I have a pretty explicit mandate, and so I have to meet that mandate. There are other beliefs I have about venture that impact what I think is investable. I can get into those beliefs, and I hinted at one, which is that as emerging funds, as an emerging fund GP, nailed it. You really have to have the endurance to want to do this for a really long time. We're seeing a lot of folks who are running emerging funds get kind of scooped up by multi-stage firms. And that's one, kind of eject button you have. Another is just not raising an ongoing fund. And, I just want to make sure I'm partnering with people who are like, this is their life's work, so to speak. Other beliefs I have about venture, I think it's really hard if you are a new brand to come in and have incredibly high ownership. The math definitely works better if you can get, 20% of a business at seed, but doing that right off the bat is aggressive.
Yeah.
And so I think working with folks who kind of understand the different nuances of ownership and the realities of the market, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing is, if I meet someone who is running the exact same strategy, which is obviously so rare, but for the purposes of this, as someone who's already in the portfolio, the bar becomes so much higher. So there's all these different things that you have to kind of like tease out. But ultimately what you're getting at is, does this person have access to a technology shift or a talent pool that seems really obscure to other people? And do they have a right to be in those companies? Like, what is that story? Are they hungry, like I mentioned? Are they willing to take on disproportionate amounts of risk? It's a mathematical reality that the highest performing GPs in this part of the market often also have the highest kill rates, which means like some things are incredible and other things are super wonky, and you have to be cool with that. You can't be doing like a 6 across the board. And the last thing is, I kind of already got at portfolio construction. But those are the kind of the things I'm teasing out. How I get there really varies.
One of the questions I have, and I put a bookmark in my mind of when you said that, is you look for people who believe this venture craft, building this venture business is their life's work. How do you assess if someone feels like this is their life's work? Because they can just tell you, Caroline, I'm going to do this forever. But anyone can say that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, of course, like I don't always get it right. But I think there's things you can evaluate, like are they speaking about this with long-term language? And for what it's worth, this is like also guidance I would give to GPs as they're talking to LPs. Like, are people talking about this relationship in a long-term way from the get-go? Are they, do they have a history of doing what they said they were going to do in the past? Do they understand kind of the magnitude, like what it means to like own a piece of a founder's business, and in doing that, be on that journey for a really long time? I think you definitely feel that way if you've been a founder yourself. So there's all these different things that kind of contribute to that, but it's certainly like, I think if I had the 1000% right answer for that, I'd maybe be like on an island somewhere instead of on this Zoom call, because I would have made it big. So,
well, little did you know, she's on a Zoom background right now. Actually, is on an island.
Yes.
If I might offer an anecdote, and I'd love, Caroline, for you to like psychoanalyze this if it makes sense to. I also look for folks who want long-term relationships, and to me, there is a difference when I came across a manager fairly recently. And I thought he was one of the smartest folks in the fintech world that I'd come across in the last few years. And I really did think he was going to do well. But he had come to me, it's like, hey, we're having a close in like 2 weeks. Can you commit in 2 weeks? And to me, that felt like, hey, you're looking to me as a number that you're eventually going to get to a close as opposed to a long-term relationship. Like, in the other part of this, I've talked to many fund managers where like, hey, I see that this doesn't make sense for you. There are things that are less obvious for you. You're hesitating clearly. I'd love to have this conversation. Let's keep in touch. Let's have this conversation 2 years from now where I'm like doing the next fund. But that feels more indicative of like, we are in this for the long term. You don't have to commit today for this to be a long-term relationship, as opposed to there is a timeline. I expect you to fulfill that timeline. I'm not making exceptions.
Some people in the market are able to command so much interest that they have the pick of who they want to partner with as LPs for the duration of their fund cycle. I also feel like sometimes, if people really do need an answer in 2 weeks, that could mean that I caught them too late, and that's on me. And that's a dynamic that's tough to come up against. And I think sometimes, and this is the same with GPs, people equate decision timeline to strength of conviction. Sometimes that's fair. I think other times it's not. And also, everybody involved in these equations is, a fiduciary of capital. And if you're in a place where the capital that you are in charge of deploying and where that capital comes from has certain expectations about, things that need to happen before you can make an investment, like you have to do those things. That's not the case for everybody. And I think one way to kind of like mitigate misunderstanding here is people just being a little bit more upfront about their processes look like. I understand there's not necessarily always an incentive to do that because then you're kind of like are revealing your card, so to speak. But I do think that having a real answer for the process you go through with GPs is super important. You also have to be really comfortable saying no. And I think that's something that a lot of people are kind of allergic to, but there's that saying that a fast no it's in some ways as good as a yes. I think that's true. I guess an example of long-term language for me is, I backed a GP who I met and was totally blown away by. And pretty immediately was like, I want to be in business with this person. I have to be in business with this person. And made a pretty quick decision and was an early institutional commit for him. And pretty immediately, you see things like when the fundraise is over and it goes really well, rather than taking a step back to be like, we did it, he's like, I'm just getting started. Now the pressure's on. Like, these are the same like languages and turns of phrase that you see with founders when like they don't celebrate fundraising, they celebrate outcomes. And I think those types of things, as people come in and they commit to the fund, it's like, yeah, great, but like now I have to make money for these people. And now I have to go out there and like be in the big bad world and win allocation. And so just that kind of orientation, I think to me is really demonstrative of success long term.
I agree. I actually think I know who you're talking about because I caught up with him at your event the other day, and he was using similar language as well. So maybe, but we can chat after. I want to round the corner here, and I'd be remiss like not to talk about the overall BCV structure as a whole. And I'm curious for you because BCV's had the Emerging Manager Seed Program for a while, and you've had a couple predecessors to this program as well. Is there anything you really wanted to keep from what your predecessor, Sarah, Amit, built and all that? And what did you feel like needed to evolve when you came in?
Good question. I would say in order to answer it, I'll maybe give the audience kind of like a brief overview of how the program's evolved and how it started, which I see kind of in three acts. So the first is in 2017, and I have to give credit to Salil Deshpande, who's now the GP of a fund called Uncorrelated. We started investing in funds, really small checks, and I'll be very transparent that was off the balance sheet for deal flow. And that's a strategy that a ton of other funds have. And what happened, which was really interesting, is that first 2017 vintage did incredibly well. So there are some absolutely incredible breakout funds in that vintage. It is performing above top 5% in the benchmarks. Like, it really was an exceptional vehicle. And so taking a step back, the team, and I can't take credit for this, realized a couple things. One, we have this incredible team of investors who can kind of help diligence, like I shared earlier. Two, we know these people. We see them in market. We have to know them before they go and start their own funds. That's a huge advantage. And three, it's borne out in the results. This is like its own properly viable investment vehicle. So let's make it a separate vehicle. And it has two goals. One is returns. The other is it's just an incredible way to kind of support the emerging manager ecosystem and help BCV build relationships. You get to meet a lot of amazing people through this exercise, and that's been really valuable mutually. And I think for the managers, not only do we kind of learn from them and share notes, but having Bain Capital committed to the fund in a first close can be really useful for these people as they go out and raise. And, we manage here at Bain Capital across all of our products about $150 billion, a little bit more than that. That's roughly the same GDP as the country of Peru. And that means we have a lot of LP relationships. And so one of the things that I do is leverage that network of LPs and help these folks close their funds. So that's kind of act two. It's a dedicated vehicle. That's Sarah Smith, Amit Bhatti, two wonderful people. And we were writing a number of smaller checks. So around $350K. And that brings us to last fall when I arrived, which is sort of the current version of the program. Obviously, I was going to say I didn't come in so hot. Maybe I came in a little hot, but I had a lot of ideas when I started, and I made some changes. So first and foremost, concentrated the portfolio. So we're now writing larger checks. They're like 1 to 2 million. And I should say this change is like, it's always a work in progress, not like overnight, all of a sudden things are different, but that's the goal now. And, I'm happy to get into why I made that choice if it's useful, but
Yeah, I would
we
love
remain
to.
a
This is
separate
what the
vehicle.
podcast is for.
Cool. Couple things. I think I've spoken about this. I was on the other side of the table. I know the amount of effort it can take to close that additional $750K, and I would rather the GPs that I back be using that time to talk to founders or do whatever else it is that they need to do to make their firm successful. And the second is the environment has changed. So the average anchor check for a $10 to $25 million fund today is $4.2 million. In 2017, when we started, it was a little less than $3 million. So that's a huge change. Relatedly, LP bases are just concentrating. So that using that same size is kind of like a benchmark. They have, I think it's 25% fewer LPs than in 2020. So things are just changing and we had to meet the market.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different kind of like cascading effects, but so far so good, I would say. Again, I think part of my mandate when I started was to kind of like put my own flavor on a lot of the amazing groundwork that had been laid into maybe answer your original question. As far as what I needed to maintain, I think Sarah and Salil and Ziza and Amin, all these different people and I should say Salamat Kalra as well, who have contributed to this over time and had their hands in it, built a practice that was built on running a GP-friendly but efficient diligence process, making big bets on people early and being supportive afterward. So that's kind of like, the continue and the start continue.
To take a step back, I want to take a step back from like venture altogether. And these are just what I call perspective questions on who Caroline is as a human being. And that'll help us round up the podcast right there. For the uninitiated, what does BGH mean?
I'm so curious to know where you pulled that from. BGH stands for be generally helpful. In my mind, there are two types of people. One type of person, if there is an event going on or you are at like a sports game and you see someone like flailing, they obviously could use a hand, will just kind of be like somebody else is dealing with that. Being generally helpful, BGH, means like you're constantly orienting. You're like, what can I do? How can I help? Let's jump in. That is like, I think, the fundamental ingredient to being a good person. But it also makes you really, I think, more helpful and successful professionally to just like constantly you got your radar on for like what you can do to improve things. We used to say that at VFA, which is like the entire team was just like, okay, you're on BGH. Like if you don't have a dedicated job, like just be generally helpful.
I love it. I stumbled across it and I thought, holy cow, this is such a great ethos to live by. So I had to ask you about it. Okay, second question. How much of your husband's stand-up comedy routines rub off on you?
Oh my God, LOL. You really do your research. I will say this. On only one day in my life will I acknowledge that my husband is funnier than I am. That day was my wedding day. Today, I say, no, he's hilarious. I would also file that under just like it's really important to be overall a well-rounded person and like have activities and like, do things. But Jack is very funny. He and I both love stand-up comedy. We both love comedy in general. I was on a work trip in Boston a couple weeks ago and went to a live recording of a comedy podcast that I love by myself on like a Tuesday. So we're both pretty committed to the bit.
Oh,
We love
it.
SNL.
What was the
in our home.
podcast?
It's called Stradio Lab. Shout out George Severus and Sam Taggart, two favorite New York-based comedians of mine.
All right. I will check that out after. I love my fair share of comedy. The regular medicine I go back to is Conan Needs a Friend.
Yeah, a classic.
But that's a classic. Okay, last question for you. From having a golden retriever fund in your wedding registry to posting dog pictures on Twitter, noting your bias here, how would you settle the age-old debate of cats versus dogs?
I mean, you gotta go dogs. Dog's a man's best friend. Dogs have been there from the get-go. Yeah, I've got a clear bias. I think I am dying. I don't know how you take your wedding registry off the internet, but I'm about to find out.
There are ways.
Dogs are incredible companions. They're so floofy. Highly recommend.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation. I feel like every single time I chat with you, I learn something new, and I also learn a different flavor of Caroline that I didn't know before.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Superclusters, we'll see you soon.
Oh my God, LOL. You really do your research.
Hey, Superclusters fans, you made it past the snap, you didn't disappear yet, so I have a mini message for you. If you enjoyed today's podcast, all I ask are two small things. One, there's a little red subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, if you liked what you heard today, that's the oxygen for this podcast. And I promise you, we will do our best to make sure you get your most profound questions answered by the most experienced allocators, like Caroline. And if you want more of what you heard from Caroline today, that's the magic button to click as well. Two, I know every single one of you has some question that I've never thought to ask and knows something that I don't. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and curiosities down in the comments. So the next time you tune in, you hear the answers to the questions that you would like to know. I promised myself I'd record 100 episodes of Superclusters, so every comment, question, and review helps me make this experience a lot more meaningful and helpful to you and makes investing in venture a little less scary and a lot more friendly. And lastly, I want to share a quick disclaimer. The views expressed on this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only and are solely the views of myself and the guest alone. They are not representative of any organization that we are a part of. None of the views expressed here constitute legal, investment, tax, or business advice. Any allusions or references to funds or companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment recommendations. Consult a professional investment advisor prior to making any investment decisions. And that's it for me. And if you want more, this left video is something we think you'll also like. And the right video is the latest one if you haven't seen it yet.